Hey fellas, welcome to this video, which will be about Alpine F1 and the recently concluded preseason testing in Bahrain. So, as we know, we're heading to our first Grand Prix of the year in a week's time, and all 10 teams were out for testing this past week for 3 days of testing, which is a lot shorter than we had previous years. So, limited testing means that teams really can't play around with as many setups as they would normally do. So I'm going to focus solely on Alpine because that's the team which I really follow and have the most interest in since many, many years. So I'm just going to share my browser and we can go through some of the articles, starting with the actual test and some of the data that came through from the test. And then there's a few more articles that I want to share going into the race this weekend. So on motorsport.com, they've got a nice article which has a few tables, and each of the tables has some interesting data that we can look at. So the first table is basically the 3 testing days, and then it lists each driver with their best times in it. So we know times are not really that important when it comes to testing, but it's not important as well. So we have to sort of pay attention to it and just kind of see, what time they done and on which tire that time was actually done on. So if you look at Alpine, none of these tables actually put them in good light because they pretty much at the bottom of all of this. So you look, there's Gasly in 17th and Ocon is dead last. Okay, so nothing really going on there. However, Alpine didn't really do much C5 running, or actually, I don't think they've done any C5 running at all, which is the softest tire, right? So they've just been on the medium compound most of the time, and then they also were required to do some of the testing on the test tire, which is also, I believe, a C3 this year. So it's also the medium compound. And when I looked at them on that tire, they actually done fairly well because they were sort of in the middle of the table, and they may have been just a bit behind Aston Martin. But again, we won't read too much into that because we don't know what strategy Aston were on and the fuel loads and that sort of a thing. The other thing which Alpine were doing is they ran a very stiff car this weekend, and that was intentional, right? So we know that running the suspension very stiff is going to cost you a lot of lap time. So, but that was an intentional thing for some of the test data that they wanted. And there's an article about that which we'll get through shortly, right? Okay, so that's the first table. The second one is the most laps done. So this is something which I consider fairly important on testing, right? And again, yeah, the two Alpine drivers are right at the bottom, pretty much 17th and 18th, right? So they didn't get through a lot of laps, okay? But at the same time, they may have got the test data which they wanted. So they may have just, done certain runs and then in the garage try and alter the setup kind of completely, which takes a bit of time to do, and then they go and do another run. So that could have been a reason why the lap count was not as high as other teams, right? And that comes down to your correlation between your track and then to your factory, right? If that's sort of good, then you don't really need to do a whole lot of laps because what they have done, the lap count is fairly decent. It's not bad at all, right? Then the next table is kilometers. Okay, this goes hand in hand with the laps that you do, or the amount of laps that you do. And again, obviously Alpine sort of there at the bottom. The last table is the engines, right? So we know Renault make the engine for Alpine. It's the same company essentially, and again, it's only one team which is running the Renault engine. So expectedly, they at the bottom. So that's sort of the overall high level data which we can show, right, from the testing that went past. And Alpine doesn't look great for them when you look at it like that, but if you have a bit more detail into the test and what they were doing, they're fairly okay. I wouldn't really be sort of demotivated by looking at these stats. Okay, so let's move on to the next article, and then this is an article which is about some comments from Esteban Ocon. But I just took this article because Gasly sort of said the similar things about the Alpine. And basically, um, the drivers are fairly happy with the car. I mean, they've both pretty much said it's the best car that they've driven in pre-season testing. So that's a positive, right? So looking at the times and how low down Alpine are, but then you go switch it around and see what the drivers are actually saying, which is more important, right? Whereas if you look at the McLaren drivers, it's kind of the opposite. If you look at what the Mercedes drivers have been saying, they've also made a few complaints, but we haven't really seen that from the Alpine boys. So that's fairly positive. I'm not going to go into detail with these articles and everything, but I will put these links to all of these articles in the video description if you guys want to have a look, right? The next article, again, speaks to the table which you saw about the lap times. And this is from Otmar now. So if you look at the headline, it says Alpine admit they haven't taken the fuel out of the A523 yet. So that's essentially saying that they've done pretty much no low fuel runs in the entirety of the testing, which goes directly with the lap times which have done. So again, nothing to worry about with the lap times. All right. And then the last article is sort of the looking into the first race of the season. So I did mention that they ran a very stiff car, specifically the suspension. And the one thing which Bahrain has in the characteristics of the track is it's quite bumpy, right? So you can't sort of run a very low car. So you got to raise the suspension just a bit so your chassis can handle the bumps a bit better, right? Otherwise, you get the porpoising and all of the other issues which have been quite apparent last season. So Alpine have actually not worried too much about setting up a higher car or making the suspension a bit more flexible. They sort of confident in their package, so they wanted to run a lower suspension and a stiffer suspension. With the knowledge that they get from it, they wanted actually to use it in other races down the line, right? Their test wasn't really focused much on Bahrain, but throughout the whole season, they sort of ran setups to see how the car would cope on the different circuits, which is quite interesting, and I think it's a useful thing, right? So this article in particular says that there's going to be two noticeable upgrades from the car that they ran in pre-season testing to the first race of the season. And essentially both of the upgrades are to do with the ride height and the suspension. So they'll be able to run a more flexible suspension, which is the first thing, which is needed on the Bahrain circuit. And the second thing is quite interesting. So apparently they can actually, they have a tool to adjust the ride height of the car, which is fairly, I think it could be a bit of a ingenuity, because I'm just trying to think. I've not really heard of any team being able to do this before. I mean, you'd have to actually upgrade the suspension itself, to either lower it or higher it. But there, with the same suspension, they have a tool to do it. So this will be quite interesting to see how this actually pans out. All right, so again, that stuff car which the journalists in it were sort of talking about is not really true in Alpine's case, because they just mentioned that they have upgrades for Bahrain specifically to sort of alleviate that. Okay, and so those are the articles that I wanted to share with you guys. But if I was to sum up the test, I think it's fairly positive from Alpine. On the C3 tire, on the final day when I was looking, they sort of were a bit behind the Astons, right? Which is sort of the position that they're going to fight for, right? Fourth is where realistically and logically they need to compete for. People saying they need to be in the top three, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen, I don't think, even next year or the year after, 2026, when the complete regulations changes come in and when F1 has sort of a long-term strategy with the cars that they want to have going into the future. That's where we're going to see teams really sort of making strides, right? Or looking at that as opportunity, because currently It doesn't make sense to go and put a lot of effort into a car which is only going to be around for what 2 3 years and then it's gone, right? So it's not going to happen. Logically, that's I don't see it happening, right? And there's not going to be any big rule changes which allow you to sort of make the most of something like trying to do a prawn or one of those types of things. But so for me, P4 is the best they can achieve. Whether it's going to be possible, for me, it would be disappointing if they didn't get fourth. I mean, they finished there last year. Aston weren't great last year, although they showed major improvements as the year went on. But yeah, I think Alpine have to sort of outdo them, because I mean that's if you're not outdoing the teams in your sort of category, then it says if 2026 comes by, how are you expected to actually beat the big boys? So for me, they have to sort of nail down the fourth position. I wouldn't even be concerned if they didn't pull away from P5. So we know last year it was fairly close with McLaren, but I wouldn't be too concerned even if a similar sort of thing happened this season. But and still going up to 2026, because we know Renault have confirmed their commitment to the sport going long term. So I mean that's the positive for me. The main things going from now till 2026 is having a reliable car, right? Because that reliability will automatically see Alpine, pick up points where they have lost so much last season. I mean, if they didn't have all the reliability issues last season, they'd have been way higher up in the points tally. Even though Ricardo and McLaren didn't work out, even with him doing well, I think the reliability on the Alpine side was a huge letdown. So let's see how it goes this season, but I'm fairly positive with the car and with the team which they've now got. I must admit, when Sefnauer took over the team, it wasn't a very inspiring sort of appointment for me. I really felt they could have gone someone within the company, someone more internal to the company. And you see how Alonso left and the sort of jabs he threw at Sefnauer. So, we don't want to see stuff like that. I mean, your driver's leaving you and he didn't tell you about it. Stuff like that you don't want to see. It's just negative press. It brings a lot of negative energy into the team, which you don't want. But, I think he's done a fairly okay job. I wouldn't say he's done any worse than his predecessor or he's doing any better. I think Matt Harmon is a positive for the team. He seems to have his house in order there. And whoever's behind the sort of micro upgrades through the season, that for me seems very logical. For a team like this year, don't put all your eggs in one basket. Rather take it weekend to weekend and bring in smaller upgrades and then see whether you're going in the right direction or not. Because if you bring in an upgrade that doesn't work, then okay, it's a small upgrade, let's revert and try something else. As opposed to bringing one huge upgrade and then it doesn't work and now you set back and your competitors from behind are catching up to you. So for a team where Alpine are, these small upgrades from week to week are a good thing. So I'm not sure who in the organization decided on that approach, but I really am a fan of it. And yeah, guys, that's pretty much what I want to talk about in this video. If you have any comments about Alpine or any of the other teams that you guys support, or whatever your predictions are, drop them in the comments and let's see. I'm excited for the start of the season and we'll see. Let's see how the pink car from Alpine does. I think it'll go well. I think the engine, with the changes that they've made, could push the team a bit forward. I don't see them challenging the top 3, but I'm positive, guys. So thanks for watching. All the best, keep well, and we'll talk again.